Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started on our final session. And so we have some explaining to do for you because you might see that there aren't any legislative panelists up here. We started initially inviting our federal Congress people and the state legislators who serve on the Human Resources, Appropriations, Health, and Education committees in early February. And we initially got, it's too early in our schedule, we'll let you know if we can attend. And we kept following up, and we have had some who have not responded, so it might be that somebody will walk in and we'll get to ask some questions. That sometimes does happen with policymakers, especially when they've got schedules where they're tightly scheduled from 5 minutes to half an hour going around the state doing things. But the other thing that happened is we got a number of no's. And the reason that we got the no's, there were reasons on the federal side and on the state side. The federal side had to do with the budget stuff that's going on and the healthcare stuff that's going on and the inability for them to really be able to leave Washington and come talk to us. The state side, they have just finished session. And so they all had other plans and other schedules and things that they needed to go do for that. Those things make sense, so I don't want to make it seem like I'm up here naysaying our policymakers. I'm not trying to do that, and I very strongly agree with Andy and Michael and the messages that they gave us this morning, that it's our job to figure out how to foster those relationships and make sure that they work and make sure that we can hear from them as well as be listened to by them. So, but I do want to add the component to that to say one of the offers that we gave was, if you can't come, would you please send a staff person? And we did not get any takers on sending a staff person. And I ran that by Andy and Michael as well and said, what do we do with our afternoon session? And what we've come up with is what Andy and Michael thought was a good idea, we thought was a good idea. They wished they could be here to facilitate, but they had to catch their planes back to Washington, so they're not here to help us with this piece. So one of the issues at hand, obviously, is that family members who have kids with disabilities, even though we are people who are listened to when we go and meet individually, as a group, as a momentum, as a movement, we're not really something that's known to the policymakers. And so the discussion this afternoon is, what are we going to do about that? Do you want to do anything about that? If so, are there a couple key issues you want to do that around? And what is it that we're going to do about that? So that those of us who are partners in this work, putting this conference together, as well as other organizations who might be able to help or who might already be working on some of those issues, can be connected to us, and we can be connected to each other to begin getting some of these things done. Does that make sense? Okay, so you have your question sheets on the tables. If you have a question that you want to ask of a legislator, federal or state legislator, feel free to still fill these out and come up at the end of the session and put them in here, or you can leave them on the tables and we'll collect them. We are going to put these out. We're going to make a document, a running document of all the questions, and we're going to send them to everybody that we invited and ask them to answer the questions. Any answers that we get back, we're also going to post them through a social media campaign. Any answers that we get back, we will make sure that all of the conference goers know about that, as well as anybody else. We'll post it on social media and put it on our website. Trying to think if there are other logistical things that I need to tell you at this point about that. I don't think that there are. So I'm going to introduce a board member of Ask Resource Center. This is Ken Gertler. He's been on Ask's board for a couple years now and is a strong family leader who has been part of the parent movement for more than 30 years. So I'll let you talk a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you all for coming. By way of background on myself, I have a daughter with Down syndrome. She's 32 years old. We came here from Texas in order to take advantage of the Iowa school system. By and large, it was a great experience, but we learned a lot about advocating for ourselves. And when I learned about Ask, which I wish there was an outfit like Ask when we first came to Iowa many, many years ago. When I learned about Ask, it was a great opportunity to give back a little bit and share, what we learned about advocating and help other people advocate for themselves. One of the great things about this conference is that you all learned a lot, and hopefully you feel more empowered to advocate. This is a good opportunity. This particular session is a good opportunity for us to really think about what we can do to make a difference, what things that we think are important, how to think about those things, how to clarify for the legislatures or politicians who are not here what that issue is that we think are important, or a couple of issues that we think are important, and also to think through how we can make a difference, either acting ourselves or making connections with others. So the way this process is going to work, first what we're going to do is try to identify those issues that are important to us. And it's sort of going to start as a shotgun. Hopefully, a lot of you have been thinking about this and there are a lot of things on your minds. And you'll raise your hands and call out, as I call on you, those things that you think are important. And we'll try to capture those. And then as we go through that process, we may see that a lot of us are saying the same thing, but just saying it in a different way. So we'll try to group those together. And one of the goals would be not to take a shotgun approach, but to actually focus on either one or two, three or four issues that not only are important to all of us, but also, and here's the other piece of that puzzle, that are also things that you can make a difference on. So not only issues that are important and can make a difference, but also issues where we, working either together or independently or with the connections we identify, can make a difference. So you got to have both of those pieces, right? It's got to be an issue that makes a difference, plus you got to have the ability to be impactful on that issue, if that all makes sense. So with that, I think we'll start with the issue identification part of the process.
So I'm just going to add one more piece before we quick do that. Bob Bacon has stuck around this afternoon from Iowa's University's Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. He has a lot of knowledge about other groups that might already be working on some things. And so we might find that Bob jumps in from time to time, sharing with us some efforts that are already going on, what priorities are happening, so that if there are things we can connect to rather than reinventing the wheel, then we have the opportunity to do that. And the other person that I want to point out, and I didn't get a chance to talk to her about this because we've both been running crazy all day, but I'm going to put her on the spot. Catherine Dorsey has had some background in policy work in the past. And so, and Catherine is one of our partners from Child Health Specialty Clinics. So this may be another person who kind of jumps up and gives us a little bit of consultative information as we work through this process, right? That's okay with you, right? You wouldn't say no because I just did that in a group.
Okay, so with that, let's get started. And what we're going to do is we're going to capture the information on these sheets of paper. As you can see, it's sort of broken out, the issues by state and federal, but you don't have to sort of guess whether your question is state or federal. Just think substantively what it is that you want us to think about. And as you raise your hands, we got some runners or a microphone. So wait till it comes so everyone can hear what it is that's on your mind. So do we have someone that wants to start the process? We got one. Great. Oh, we got two?
Better. Someone else.
Hi, I'm Mike Pace. I learned this afternoon that the state of Iowa does not have a PE curriculum statewide. And when it comes to special needs children, not having a PE curriculum, and the teachers, or the educators rather, they're just kind of like winging it district by district. And so what we need to do is have a consistent PE system, curriculum in place. So,
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think we had one over here.
Oh, sorry. I'm Craig Barnum from Cedar Rapids. The one that I think is the one that I'm most passionate about is I think we have to absolutely assert our voice and change the policymakers at the federal level in terms that the $800 billion Medicaid cut. I think that without those funds, I think a lot of the local programming dries up. And I think we need to get away from this idea that there's, the block grant idea has to go and the spending cut in general has to go. They have to get over that idea because they have to see what that's going to do to the kids and the people in our lives. So,
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christine Conway, and I have, it's pretty encompassing. As far as a vocational programming, work skills program for our kids that are between the ages of 16 and 22, there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot in our state. I don't know about federal, as far as nationwide, but federally, the state of Iowa doesn't have much as far as programming for our kids, 16 to 22-year-old.
Great. Thank you. I think there's.
Hi, I'm Catherine Hahn. I think my biggest concern is since we switched over to the MCOs taking care of the Medicaid, they have pretty much obliviated the long-term service support, the HCBS waiver programs, and has made it very difficult for people to keep accessing services. And those of us that were able to get unique things in place are now in danger of losing them because of the state's insistence that everybody goes to the same flat rate and not looking at needs anymore. So I think as a community, we need to come together and talk about that because what my son needs may be very different than what somebody else's daughter or son needs, and it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all.
Thank you. Right behind you.
I guess one of the things that I'm most concerned about is the fact that there's still a lot of kids on waiver programs that aren't getting served at all. And with cuts to Medicaid, the waivers are probably never going to happen. And if kids don't get off those programs, they're not getting Medicaid services, early interventions getting money taken away. How are our young children going to become adults that are contributing to our society if we can't get them any resources?
Great. Thank you for that. And by the way, could you your name, please?
Oh, sure. Mindy Smith Pace. Sorry.
Okay. No worries. Any other issues? Anybody else want to add to the list? We have one over here. Why don't you just take mine?
I don't know what the solution is, but people with developmental disabilities don't seem to fit into any nice hole. So there's very little funding. And there's a great reliance on county funding, which seems to be always at risk along with everything else. And another topic is the IDEA has never been fully funded by the federal government as they said they would, which is a huge problem. We've lost, who knows, I think they funded at 40% of what they said they would.
Now, Deb, I can read your name tag, but could you tell everybody your name?
Deb Hobbs.
And as you raise your hand and or have an issue you want to talk about, please. It was a great idea, I think, for you to say who you are and where you're from. I think the people in the room appreciate that.
Yeah, Aaron doesn't fit into one of the nice, neat waivers because they're not even accepting people on that waiver. And even if they were, there is not money for housing. And it goes back to the one-size-fits-all mentality that we have.
Thank you, Deb. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Carrie Rivers, and I hate talking in front of groups, but here we go. I'm concerned about the portability to private schools and people with disabilities getting the same level of education, because if they can't port their special needs services to the other school, they won't get the same access. I worry about the pre-existing conditions if they don't fund it. I don't understand everything that's going on in the government, but my kid, once he turns 18, may not be able to get his medication or the same meds he used to get if it's not covered.
Thank you.
My name is Laura Lutz-Zimmerman, and I guess my concern is the variation from state to state, and especially as they're offering waivers or exemptions with some of the changes that are coming, what that looks like from state to state, and if they do that with the block grants, how some states may be really more limited than others. And so at the federal level, I'd like to see some consistency or some supports for folks that would be affected. Changes in what that looks like, especially if they offer waivers or exemptions to specific policies that some states may offer.
My name is Clementine Carl. I'm from Des Moines. And I was pleased to see that there was some movement in the state legislature with coverage for ABA being mandated. But I still know many people whose insurance does not cover speech therapy and occupational therapy, which are, for children with autism, sometimes essential.
So this is the first step in the process, just to identify those issues that we think are important to us. The next step in the process is going to see if we can sort of consolidate and boil, collect them in a way that we can take some action. Let's see. You're like a Vanna White, right? So what do we? Let's see. We have on the state side, statewide physical education curriculum. We have a need for vocational programming.
It is here, and that's a lot of different things. Actually, I think a lot of the stuff that was said is related to the waiver stuff and the healthcare stuff.
Yeah, so far we're seeing two training curriculum, the vocational, statewide. Then we see a group of a host of Medicaid related questions, and then we see sort of federal level question driving consistency across state lines, making sure that families and kids in each state get the same level of service.
So I'll look to Bob and Catherine to help me with grouping these, but as I look at the things that you guys have talked about, the PE curriculum and no standardization of services and supports in schools kind of go hand in hand. Like PE is one of the subcategories of things that are not consistent in schools, but the lack of consistency is the overall. So that would be one. Two is lack of vocational programming, which is a different component than the school piece. Three is a whole list of stuff around waivers and healthcare supports in general, and and then that even includes the federal component of the waiver cut, or cut to Medicaid, I mean, and yeah, really the inconsistencies state to state on healthcare that plays into the Medicaid and the whole healthcare concern, and then IDEA being underfunded is a separate federal piece.
You know, when you do a brainstorming session like this, it's kind of like what's more important, air or water? But from my experience, the cuts to Medicaid, the block granting present terrible crises for our state. And the stories that were shared today are absolutely so valuable. Andy and Michael reinforced the power of your voice. What I feel really needs to be emphasized is that we're dealing with things that are so complex. That American Health Care Act, legislators voted on that without knowing not only what it was going to cost, but even necessarily even understanding what block granting is, or what per capita caps are, or what the implications of taking away the opportunity for Medicaid expansion. So I believe sort of a generic need that we have is for simple, plain language explanations of just what is block granting, what is per capita cap, for example, so that when you have the opportunity to talk to a policymaker, you can actually help educate them. And that goes for their staff as well. I was in Washington 3 weeks or so ago and was visiting with staff and congresspersons before the first vote on the American Health Care Act. And it was just so stunning how staff and legislators did not understand what those concepts were. If I could go, I can go on and on about this, but I think I'm not sure how closely you all have followed mental health and disability services redesign over the past few years. How we've gone from a county-based system that was funded primarily by property taxes to a regional system. And as of July 1st of 2012, now the state of Iowa provides the match to draw down federal Medicaid dollars, whereas in the past, it was county property tax dollars that did that. Well, I believe that Iowa is on the cliff of going back to the old system. If Medicaid expansion goes away, and if block granting happens, you're going to have fewer and fewer dollars in the system. You're going to have Medicaid expansion covered about an additional 140,000 people, many of whom have mental health challenges. And in the past, those supports have been provided primarily through property tax dollars. So take away Medicaid expansion and put block granting in place. And I think the progress that Iowa has made in terms of implementing Olmstead, making life in the community more possible for people, it's significantly threatened, and we could be going back to having county property taxes, if services are going to be provided at all, have county property taxes, once again covering a disproportionate share. Another example of the kind of basic education that policymakers need. You talk about the home and community-based waivers. Under Medicaid, you've got a state has certain set of required services that must be offered if you're going to take the federal Medicaid dollars. But then there are a set of so-called optional services. And it's up to a state as to which of those they're going to offer, because a state supplies, Medicaid is a federal-state partnership. And so a state has to decide how much money they're going to invest in the Medicaid program. Well, it scares the bejesus out of me that among the optional services are the home and community-based waivers. And I would bet you that 9 out of 10 federal officials, staff members, don't know that. So when they vote on block granting, for example, which has the potential to reduce the amount of dollars in the system, you're basically, what's going to happen over time is that the cost of services will rise, but there'll be less money to go around, and the state will have to be faced with choices. Like there's no choice but that they would have to provide the required services, but they may choose to not offer some of the so-called optional services, and they are anything but optional, as you well know. So I talked too long.
No, I think, but if, as I was listening to what you were saying, and I was trying to connect it back to some of the things we've talked about in this group just a couple of moments ago, it's making sure those people making those decisions understand exactly what the people in this room feel they need. And if the people in this room can articulate what they need in a way that they can understand, then they can look at the laws and legislation they're enacting and say, okay, so is that service really covered? Mike, I'm hearing people say they need this. Is it still covered?
Good.
But today, I heard you say, they don't know what they're actually, what it's covered. I'm sorry, did you have something?
There's a small agency in our area called Illinois-Iowa Center for Independent Living. They only cover 3 counties in Iowa. But it'd be something that, exactly what you're saying, if we could get something statewide, they do exactly what Bob's talking about. They educate the legislators on exactly what they're voting for. They pick apart these laws and they say, okay, do you realize if you vote yes on this, you are essentially taking this service away? You're taking this service away. They're helping us. Earlier I was talking about the stroller. They're helping us go to the legislators and say, okay, when you voted on this policy, this is where it's taken this service away from my child. It's taken this service away. They're essentially going to the legislators and educating them. This is something we need statewide because it would educate these legislators on what they're actually voting for.
There are actually 7 centers for independent living in Iowa. Not all counties are covered, but I think, Karen and I were talking, if we can collaborate in terms of the positions that we want to take, expressing concern about the Medicaid expansion and so forth, and do that in collaboration with the Centers for Independent Living, with ASK, with the Center for Disabilities and Development. Now we're a state agency, got to be careful on that, but there's a component of what we do. We can educate, we can't lobby, but basically what we're talking about is education. The DD Council that was here, they do tremendous work with Infonet. It's a great source of information. Disability Rights Iowa. And I guess I don't know, it's been a long time, if ever, that all of those entities have had a common voice to express concerns. And I think if we did that, that in itself would make a statement.
When you say the state will decide what options they're willing to pay for, what is the term, or what is the state? Is that really the MCOs at this point?
It's actually the Department of Human Services, basically the governor, ultimately, and the Medicaid, the managed care organizations are the vehicle through which Medicaid is being implemented in Iowa. It's good that Medicaid managed care is on there. I can give you another example of the effect of Medicaid managed care. Have you heard of the Money Follows the Person program? That's one that my program implements. Right. We have helped now 600 people transition from Woodwood and Glenwood Resource Center to the community. Some people have had to return, a small number, because Iowa doesn't have the community capacity to support people with special needs. But okay, once Medicaid managed care hit Iowa, our transition efforts are in the process of being stalled because the managed care organizations do not want to pay the rate that we have been able to pay during the transition year. So community providers are being forced to take cuts to meet the needs of high need individuals. And that is unsustainable.
So looks like we've got 2 issues emerging that we want to focus on. The first is Medicaid, and it's a 2-part question. Not only the amount of funding available, but also how it's administered here in Iowa. So Medicaid's one big ticket item. And then the other one I think we heard was consistency in what's provided in the school systems, whether it's vocational training or physical education or autism services. I can't remember all of them because she moved the board. So, Mara, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people who aren't eligible for Medicaid services and don't feel like they are able to get some of the same services, and so that's another issue that I feel like is just access for people that don't have Medicaid to the same kinds of services.
Okay. So if you remember when we talked about how this was going to work, the first step in our process was to identify those issues. And so what we're coming down to is Medicaid, and we're going to use that, thanks to Mark, broadly, the money that it's available to provide services, how much is available, and then how it's administered inside the state. That's one big issue. Then the other issue I think we're agreeing on is the consistency within the system on the programs and services that are provided in the school systems, right?
And that includes the voc rehab, the PE, and then consistency in general in terms of services that are offered across the state and across state lines. We heard that as well.
Yeah, so so we've completed step one, which is pretty good, right? Now step two is even harder than step one, which is to talk about what do we do? What are the next steps? And Karen knows, she's giving me prompts to make sure I get them all. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
I think it would be incredibly powerful to get several large organizations behind the notion, and I'm fixated on the Medicaid piece of it, so that's where I'm at right now. Behind that, I think that sends a powerful message, but I don't think that's adequate. I don't think that's enough. And maybe I'm jumping the gun for where we want to go next. But it was pretty clear to me from our keynotes, and one of the key understandings I took away from this, and again, it's very intuitive, but I don't think we can say it enough, is that we're not going to change this thing without connecting to people's emotions and their affect. And I think we do that one story at a time. And one of the things I'm going to do when I walk out of here is I'm going to make sure that I contact, and it would be good if we had a common set of contacts that we were going to high leverage folks. So when I talked to Andy afterwards, one of the keynoters, he gave me a name in Senator Grassley's office to start with. I think we ought to all do that. Tell our stories to that person. And not in a way that's confrontational or that is saying, hey, my kid is going to die if they don't get these services. And that might be true, but to connect with them, to say, listen, here's what this means. And that's part of that education process, but that's what's going to engage them, I think. And we ought to do that individually as well as collectively. And so my sort of call to action would be, is everybody in this room who's got a story would be to get those contacts. And if Ask or whoever is facilitating this could provide that to the folks who are here, that would be an awesome next step.
So one of the things we wanted to do is see if people had idea for those contacts, right? There are some that we know that Ask knows and can provide, but to the extent people in the room have ideas about who those contacts are, where those stories should go to, feel free to offer.
You can get a lot of that online just by looking at the 7 different organizations that, Bob, you keep mentioning. I guess if those are our organizations that are supposed to be supporting our voices, how often do you guys talk to each other? I mean, we talk about power in numbers, but everybody has their own little piece that they're trying to do, and I understand that. But wouldn't we be better off to have set up some kind of forum where those organizations can come first together to create an agenda to take out to all parents, and not only host it in Des Moines, but to host it on the east side and to host it on the west side? I realize sometimes that the whole world thinks that there is not life in Iowa outside Des Moines, but being from the far east and for those from the far west, we do still live in Iowa.
Another thing we need to look at is money. There are, I believe, if I have my facts right, there are 3 MCOs. 2 of the 3 are failing. United Healthcare is not. And what the problem, or what part of the problem is that the 2 MCOs, remember, they're all for profits, right? They're all to make money, okay? And 2 of them are getting the money, but they're not distributing the money out to the providers. United Healthcare, fortunately, is doing the right thing. at least from my understanding, if I have my facts right. But the problem is the money. We can cry to our senators, okay, and that's not going to do a damn bit of good. We have to give them facts. We have to give them figures. That's how we're going to get to them, okay? We just can't just tell them our stories. Okay, yeah, so what? We all have special needs kids. Okay? So does 5 million people have kids with special needs. Okay? What we have to do is we have to give them facts and figures. How is this going to save money? How is this going to spend money? And what are the research? What does the research say? We have to give them concrete, objective information. And these 7 organizations should have, or at least I hope they have, that information. And if not, we have to go and maybe collaborate with other states and or other organizations in other states to find out what exactly is going on.
So, hi, I'm Catherine. I'm with Child Health Specialty Clinics, and thank you, Michael. And actually, you're both right that working with emotions plus having the facts and figures and the data and the evidence, they need to go together. So it's a two-prong approach. And this year with Child Health Specialty Clinics, for example, every year we write a year in a review. We tell the policymakers, this is how much money you invested for the maternal child health program, Title V for children and youth with special health care needs, and our 14 regional centers across the state. Here's what we're giving you in return for your investment. We try to keep it in that investment terms. For the first time this year, I went in, I got census data, nonpartisan census data, and I was able to get the number of children with disabilities by state House district, by state Senate district. And so that table went with our little update. And believe me, those representatives were quite shocked how many children with disabilities they have in their districts. And that was just a simple number. And I didn't know what the reaction to that number would be, but it was a very positive reaction. And the point that I always like to make is, yeah, I know children don't vote. It can be hard with children's issues. The children don't vote. But let me remind you, those children have grandparents. Those children have aunts and uncles. Those children have cousins. Those children have parents, and they vote. And so multiply that number of the children with disabilities. And so the work that you're doing is going to be incredibly, incredibly powerful because you do have all of these groups, or you have all these extended families for each child. And that's something to keep in mind, that is something that you can bring to the table.
Thank you. So one of the things I am hearing is that information is out there, but there isn't a consistent, efficient, and effective way of gathering it all together and presenting it. And so one of the other ideas I heard was to getting all of those groups together, getting them in a room, talking about how to best gather the information and then present it to the policymakers. And that's one of the, is that an action? Is that? And that is something that is actionable, which is one of the other things that we have to include in our little formula here. Not only is it a big ticket issue, but is there something that could be done? So one of the things in that particular action item is to have someone that takes that initiative. Who would that someone be? The comment was, isn't there a cost if you don't provide these services, in the costs overall to society goes up by not providing these services. Yeah. And that's part of that story that needs to be told, not only the human interest side of it, but also the economics side of it. So I think
Anastasia Coles Decor, what I've found, I've been in family planning my whole life, is that yes, when you use the numbers of prevention of unplanned pregnancies compared to the birth control, and that's a whole other issue which we won't get into here, but it makes people open their eyes. So I think we could probably use it for the disabilities that our children will have that will cost more as they get older for the state. And if we can talk about not preventive, but treatment at an early time.
thanks.
Okay, so one of the things I'm thinking about the organizations that we've been talking about here, a lot of us are partners in this conference, and some of those that aren't are supportive of the conference and just maybe aren't partners because they mostly serve professionals rather than families or what have you. But I really think we're poised as organizations. This is a really great time for us all to come together. There's a lot of new leadership. There's a lot of revitalization among us, and a lot of us are very aligned in what we want to do. But much like Catherine was saying, it's two-pronged. We need to use data and we need to use emotion and stories. I think we need to use organizations, but we also need to use the people that are being impacted by it. And even though ASK and many of the other organizations are family-driven, family-led, we're also still professionals in this. And so I think it's important that we get pure parents, natural families, those of you who don't live in this because it's your job, it's going to mean a very different thing when I show up and try to say to anybody that I want you to save my paycheck, even though that's not the issue for me. I'm a parent, I'm a person with a disability, that's the issue for me, but they know me as a person who works in it, and I'm asking them to save my paycheck. So I think that the next step that we want to go to is I'm all about this, getting the organizations together, and those of you that are in the room that are part of them, I can see them going, yeah, we want to do that too. Where would you like to be in that process? I'd like to know how you would like to best be engaged in that so that we can make sure that that happens for you and you feel included and involved and driving it right along with us.
Hi, I'm Tessa. My son has many disabilities. I think that part of this is that we are looking at it from a parent perspective. We are looking at it from employment. We are looking at it from many different perspectives. But we live in an age of social media. Let's use it.
And I also wondered if these agencies, do you already have parents on your boards or parent support groups that, and how does a person get involved with one of those, and could that be a support system for the agencies to bring? I guess what I'd like to see is information put together before the next state legislative session, and it's going to be vital for going out to the Washington before they start doing the more of this Medicaid fiasco.
I'm Nancy Miller from Fort Dodge. Would it be possible to do an online, like a town hall meeting with Senator Grassley, for the families to give their stories and the organizations, Ask Resource or whoever, to bring in statistics and provide all of this information to Senator Grassley in a timely manner then, where people don't have to travel?
Nicole Gaffney from Davenport. I think a big thing is to bring in the emotional component as well as the professional. Have another gathering like this. All of us bring our kids. Allow these people to see what we're going through. See some of these children. See what we deal with in our everyday life. Not just a picture, not just hearing our story, seeing us with our children, seeing what we deal with every day. That's what makes the difference.
Hi, I'm Paula Connelly. I'm on ASK staff and sometimes do some related policy work. And I would really, I think these are all wonderful ideas, but I also think we need to show up to local things. I will tell you late last year and part of this year, DHS held over 32 listening posts all across the state. And I was at every one of them because of a role I played on a Medicaid advisory committee. There were no families in the room. We continually sent out social media asking families to show up, and providers came, and the MCOs all walked away with the impression families are fine. And again, as Karen said, then that leaves people like me in the role to say, no, actually, families aren't fine. I work with them every day. I get their phone calls. I can give you a synopsis, which we provided, but it didn't mean the same thing because, like Karen said, they know me. They hear me. They've heard my pleas. So I'm going to plead with you to remember when you walk out of here that we need you. You need to go to, there are opportunities. You don't have to travel. Your Iowa legislators are in your own, near your homes. Town halls are the best way. And just keep this in mind because when you don't show up, it's like we don't have an issue. I've seen it. I've been there when I've heard it. Bob's nodding, he's also been there. And they just kind of go, well, I guess everything's fine. And we all know everything is not fine. For us, for the people we love and our neighbors who have disabilities. So I'm going to leave you to remember that.
Thanks, Paula. So we're coming to the end of the session. And so this is what the next steps are. We're going to collect all the information. We're going to summarize it all. We're going to send it out to all of you via email, along with the email of all the participants, so that you can start making connections. We will also, as these agencies meet, keep you all updated on those meetings and to make sure that you're connected with and fully informed on all the next steps that we're taking. Yeah, we've got that. So when we capture this information on who's impacted and who has needs and the economics of those needs, we'd include both groups, those that are currently covered and those that are not.
Would it be possible to include the names of the legislators who were invited to this conference? Is that possible? I'd be interested in, I realize all these people cannot come, but for nobody to come and for there to be some non-responses is pretty, that's kind of disappointing that not one person would come or send a representative.
Well, I mean, you can view it as a disappointment or just a call to action to us, that we just have to be better at advocating for ourselves.
And one of the things that Andy and Michael said about that before they left, because I asked them that question too, what do we do to follow up now and not make it a bad thing? Because they were certainly telling us it has to be relational. That's the first step. It has to be relational. It has to make sense to them. And everything that you all have said plays into that. For some, the relationship is the data and the numbers and then the economic piece. For others, they're going to listen to the stories. They certainly all need to understand what we're all really going through. And so showing them is going to help with that. So, we need to do all of those pieces for them. And I lost the whole point that I started to talk about that. Oh, I know. Michael had said, one thing that some of you should do is go make visits back with those folks and say, this is a conference I was at, and I understand you were invited, and that if you couldn't attend, you were offered to send a staffer, and nobody was there. Why is that? And see what they have to say.
I think we can kind of make a virtue out of necessity. I mean, they weren't here, but what an opportunity this has been to mobilize and to recognize that we want to do something collectively. I think the associations that sponsor this conference need to own working on developing those plain language explanations of what the policy issues, so that then there can be a common message. And in terms of there is urgency, absolutely. But don't remember what Andy said. that the bill that the House just passed will not pass in the Senate. And it's not that we can relax, but there is time for us to be planful about what we want to do. And remember, there is a long history in this country of a bipartisan approach to disability. I had the opportunity a few years ago to present Senator Grassley an award on behalf of a consortium of disability organizations based in Washington as a disability champion. Why? He collaborated with Senator Kennedy in the Family Opportunity Act. He's responsible for changing Medicaid policy 1915I, which allows people with mental health challenges to, in effect, get more community-based services. I think if we approach policymakers from the perspective that remember what Andy said, we don't criticize first. We give them information, and we assume that they want to be an ally in making life better for people. The problem is they just don't have the information that they need about the potential danger they could do by a vote, and they don't have enough information in terms of hearing your stories. But we can get there.
Yes, and that's the opportunity, and that's the action plan we're going to put together.